All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to season 3 of the Hawk Vision podcast. I am your host, Chuck Hawkins, here to help you shorten the learning curve on your way to greatness. Over 100 interviews of successful entrepreneurs and thought leaders have graced this show so that we can understand what the process of chasing and achieving greatness actually looks like. Make sure you like, share, subscribe across all your social media platforms, especially here at YouTube. More importantly, make sure you share this podcast with other visionaries just like you. We have got a very special episode this week. The gentlemen that we're going to hear from today are helping to disrupt the systemic issues when it comes to access to investment capital, strategic networks, and overall entrepreneurial opportunities for African Americans. Based out of North Carolina, Resilient Ventures has been experiencing phenomenal success to date. And when they were placed on the radar, it just made sense. We had to have this conversation. Now, as visionaries, you know that we love the story of success, and our guests today are showing exactly how to get there. Tom Droege, Keith Daniels of Resilient Ventures, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Very glad to be here. Thank you, Chuck.
Absolutely. So listen, I have been a fan of success and wealth for over 15 years. I think jumped in when I started with network marketing. How did you guys, one, how did you meet? And then two, the idea to start venture capital, one of the most quote unquote dangerous, risky investments games out there.
Well, I'll dive right in. Again, really, really grateful to have a chance to be on your show, and congratulations, episode. So many great interviews. You know, as an African American man, I've walked the earth for over 50 years now. I've learned a few things about relationships and stepping out of comfort zones. Most of my career has been in higher education, philanthropy, and just around people who are, concerned about those who are experiencing oppression or marginalization. And Tom and I have mutual friends who had traveled internationally and were coming back to relocating back or returning back to Durham, North Carolina, and looking to do asset-based community development work. And they asked us to be a part of an advising group as they were thinking through and kind of actually encouraging us to understand the difference between asset-based development as a philosophy and a practice versus focusing on the deficits in communities. So that was a bit of a game changer, right? To start thinking more, particularly about how have we overcome? How have we made the most of resources? When I say we, I'm explicitly talking about African American community and the oppressive and racist structures of America.
Yeah.
So those mutual friends were very inspiring, and they go way back in our life. I mean, Tom was very connected to this particular family, and they happened to be a Black couple. And the race questions this is like early 2000s. We were already looking at reading books like The Disintegration of Black America, for example. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but looking at just the ways we've tried to reach, quote, middle class in this country, whether or not you were immigrating from the country or perhaps you did get out of the hood, so to speak. And what does it mean to kind of enter into another wealth category, even so far as looking at Obama and like Oprah Winfrey and some of these kind of transcendent millionaires or wealth accumulators, and just seeing the divide around that. So in those conversations with Tom and I happened early, and then we went on our different paths. Tom running his company, me doing work in higher ed and going back to divinity school and doing work in theology. Always, both of us have missionary experiences abroad, have been impacted by what it means to, humble ourselves and be in other spaces and see the difference between the way things are done in the West, which as much as we have a love for our country, I mean, we got some wretched things going on as far as whose backs are being exploited. So we were centering that conversation early, and then in about 2015 or 16, we kind of collided again at a church conversation around race and reconciliation. Tom asked me to be a part of a pilot group, talking to his peers, and the peers meaning mostly white men, white leaders in the evangelical church space,
yes.
Which again that's kind of my field, but more in the academy. And from that, and really seeking to educate them on the history of race, racism. We did our first kind of project adventure together in creating a course called Christianity Deconstructs Racism. Okay. Hundreds of people went through this very intense, truth-telling look at the history of race and racism in our country and what it has done to both white and Black. And then coming off of that, a series of that, Tom said, "Hey, let's take a particular intentional action." And he put the first money in, and we just set sail to go raise the fund that we have now. And it's been a lot of wonderful things in between. We've committed to intentional relationship and spent a lot of time hiking, biking, doing everything except being on the golf course, because that's not something he and I do. But we spend a lot of our free time and time we have in the margins thinking deeply about our lives and what it means to be in what we call the movement to close the wealth gap through ownership, and particularly sourcing and deploying capital in African American founders.
So Tom, I like that answer, Keith. I don't want to cut you off, but Tom, one of the things that I heard there with Keith is that you guys did both parts, right? You had the conversation, the difficult conversation that most people don't want to have, right? If we're being completely honest, it's very uncomfortable, especially the more truth you tell, the more facts that you show and report. It's a difficult conversation. So you guys were able to have that, and then come in with, let's have some actionable takeaways. Talk to me about that part and why it was important to wrap up the conversation with actionable next steps.
Right. Yeah, so it was our mutual friend, Ernest, back in the 90s for me when I first met Ernest, 95, so it wasn't like the beginning of the 90s. But so our work together started with Promise Keepers in the church when it was talking about racial reconciliation, and he and I were appointed to leadership in the Durham area. He was actually the chairman, I was his assistant. And on his own, I mean, we could have not done this, I suppose, but on his own, he intentionally sort of tutored me on the question of race in America. And he would start all these conversations, that would end up like explaining what it was like for him to be Black in America. Yeah. And I had enough sense to listen, I suppose, and not argue, push back too strongly.
Yeah.
Because they could have been those kind of conversations, and some of them were a bit, touchy, like you say. But for the most part, I was listening and learning. And then, my journey in this, I had started as an entrepreneur in the 80s.
Okay.
So this was kind of what was going on with me in the 90s. And that kind of became a bit of my, mission to encourage, my white peers to have these same conversations. And I would actually tell a lot of people that I knew, I said, like, have you ever had a conversation with African American about what it's like to be Black in America? And they would say, no. Well, you should, why don't you ask them that? Why don't you give someone the liberty to explain to you what it's like, and then just listen? And, that was one thing I was trying to encourage my peers to do. And really only one person in my entire experience took me up on that. And wow. He came back with a wonderful experience. I mean, he came back and said, wow, this person told me that no one had ever asked her that question. And she started to tell me all the stuff, and I didn't know it, and I listened. So what I did learn is to listen and to learn. And then it was kind of interesting because my relationship with the same person transitioned over the next 10 years or so to a point where we would get together once a year, and he'd say, Tom, you need to go to this conference.
Okay.
Racial equity. And it was a 2-day, $200, and not so much the dollar, it was more like my weekend. And I mean, this conversation happened 3 times every year. He'd tell me the same thing. And I'd say to him, like, why can't you just fill me in? What is it I'm going to learn in 2 days that you just can't tell me like you used to tell me, right?
Right.
So he just wouldn't budge. He would just say, you need to go to this.
Got to experience it. Yeah.
So I eventually did go. And I think that was pivot moment for me to realize that this is my responsibility, and I can't go to my Black friend and ask him for another quick tutorial on what
another how-to
thing is. So yeah, and then it transitioned to, like, as I started to take responsibility and learn these things and actually work with Keith to educate my other peers,
Mhm.
I did start to hear another voice from the African American community that would say, this is your responsibility, and you can be an ally. You can speak to your peers. You can educate them, but just don't do it by yourself, right? Just don't be a lone ranger out there.
Yeah.
Fix things. So that's a bit of my progression to be a learner, and then to have enough knowledge to take responsibility and then teach others.
Awesome. So we fast forward and we start Resilient Ventures. And before we jump into like some of the successes, some of the wins, I want to talk a little bit about venture capital, right? Because there's social media has created this environment where a lot of entrepreneurs feel like all they need is an investor and that will help them get to XYZ. And I feel like there's not a deep level of understanding between the types of entrepreneurs that need investors and the type of entrepreneurs that need a little bit extra money just to get up and running, whether that's logistics or products or things like that. What is it that you guys look for if you're partnering with a company for saying seed money or for expansion, the different stages of a startup? What is it that Resilient Ventures is looking for when they partner with a company?
Well, can I give a little background on that?
Sure.
As an entrepreneur myself, you learn, 40 years in the business, you'd rather not take money at all, right? The best thing is to grow your business with your revenue and slowly, and not depend on any money from anyone else, because any kind of money is going to be costly.
Right.
And there's different kinds of money. And so when we talk to when we just have this conversation with people, I mean, there's friends and family money. Well, African Americans really don't have friends and family money per se. So sure. That's one thing that's probably not available here. And to the part of our conversation with people that we're trying to fund the fund so we can invest in Black founders is to say, look, African Americans don't have friends and family. So not only is there a greater need for what we're doing, but you can't ding a Black founder because he doesn't have friends and family. And that's what the white VC world kind of does, right?
Right.
So the other thing to consider is that VC, we have this image of venture capital that is like it's this great, amazing thing. Well, VC money is at the very bottom end of like how companies build wealth. It's like the early stage startup money. Mm-hmm. And what many people don't understand is a lot of VCs are entrepreneurs themselves, and they are essentially startups themselves. So it helps to put that into perspective. But then it's also true that the kind of money, like the bigger VC companies have traditional bigger VC companies. When I was an entrepreneur, we called them vulture capitalists, right? And for good reason. And yes. So they're a lot more serious and demanding than, say, an angel investor, and certainly a lot more demanding than your friends and family. And so you want to be careful to even consider taking money from a VC.
Yeah, it's a thing, because you see shows like Shark Tank for the popular culture. You see shows like the Shark Tank, or there's a couple other shows on several channels where they always talk about how much you value the company at versus how many shares or percentages you're willing to give up. And I think people forget that taking seed money. You know, I relate it to the mob. I have an interesting family background and I relate it to having a loan shark, right? Where that he'll definitely give you $1,000 to fix your car, get your wedding ring out of pawn, but it's going to cost you $10,000 on the back end. And do you not have this money, right? We're taking over everything. So Keith, what do you guys look for if a company's gonna say, you know, yes, we understand we may owe you a leg, right? But what do you guys look for when you're investing in a company?
Well, as Tom said, you know, we as a startup ourselves, we had to first we were clear that we believed that deal flow wasn't an issue in terms of geniuses out there, and I like to use that word. I often tell the story about my family. My mother and father moved up north, ended up working for the government, you know, career government employees, civil servants. And looking back, I said they could have started a business in a couple of different things. My father was a drafting engineer. Wow. He could have probably ran a marketing company that was all about creativity and image but that was never, you know, a consideration, never a conversation about entrepreneurship.
Right.
But the fact that, so we set out like debunking this idea that deal flow would be an issue.
Okay.
So, and it's been wonderful to meet. I was on the phone today with a woman. I was I'm a Duke alum, three degrees from Duke University, and very much connected to the university space. So I do have a network of folks who are out there, very successful. And I happened to meet a woman recently from the Maryland area, has a tremendous product. And she's been at it since 2013, I think she said. Still, you know, got her patents. I mean, she's a PhD. You know, you look at her background, I'm like, oh my goodness. And we see folks like that all the time. Yeah. And we traveled a lot around the country. We coalesced and reached out to a lot of the venture capital firms that were, you know, in the Northeast and on the West Coast, places in between. And so it was just a matter of, okay, we're not going to have an issue, you know, finding these geniuses. Now, what categories, what sectors do we feel like we can add value? Do we feel like we have a network space that could add value? There was some consideration of proximity, even though our first investment was in Chicago, which again, that kind of came by way of relationships. Yes. Most of our investments are in the Carolinas. We have 2 in Atlanta and 1 in Detroit. Okay. So, you know, the ecosystem was flourishing here in Durham, North Carolina. We are a legacy city when it comes to Black wealth.
Very much so.
Historically, there's lots of conferences that happen or were happening before the pandemic. Yes. Black Wall Street Homecoming. And I still remember back in, I guess that was 18 or 19, meeting some founders who are still going strong today, coming out of the Black Wall Street Homecoming and Google for Black Entrepreneurs Exchange. And so Tom and I just said, we'll just set sail and we're going to be relatively agnostic. We said we'd stay out of anything that was mob oriented, alcohol or yes, anything kind of that not taxes aren't being paid on, that sort of thing. But sure. We've tried to be open to, we did explicitly say we would look to invest in a kind of a Main Street type of business or two.
Sure. And
we've done that. We're very proud of the cafe shop owner here in Durham who has a cool brand, coffee brand, and some retail outlets that we've helped undergird his capital base so that he could expand his outlets. Right. And so that's kind of the broad picture right now. The companies have to be, we're looking for a year of revenue. So we're not the earliest of stage. We're like, we want to know you've discovered your customer, you've penetrated the market on some level, and maybe you're trying to get to that 1%, right? And right, our money can help you get there or get to that next significant milestones that are in place. So most of our founders have, you know, they just didn't come up with the idea, you know, recently and saying, I need some money to prove it. So that's how we kind of de-risked our non-traditional backgrounds into this space. And then we surrounded ourselves with experts and people in the field as advisors. And all of our operators are led by African Americans, from our attorney to our, to folks who've helped us with marketing, our accounting. And it's been really a joy to do that.
You guys you still refer to yourself as a startup, and I love that. But I'm doing my research. You guys have built up an impressive team. I'm looking at the list of the investment committee, as well as the advisory committee, and you got some heavyweights that have joined the team. How does it feel to put a vision out there and have people buy into it?
It's a great feeling. We were advised not to just pick an advisory committee out of names that looked good, but for each person to have a key strategic role on our committee. Yeah. And so there's that there also. Like, for instance, Rayford Davis is a Y Combinator alumni. So he was one of the first African Americans to go through Y Combinator. He's also a failed entrepreneur. But
as many entrepreneurs are, though.
Well,
right?
Yeah, he's a Howard graduate, Harvard Business School, McKinsey consultant for years and years, and now he's working at Amazon. And I'd love to tell you what he's doing there, but it's amazing. So that's just one story behind our committee. So yeah, we have an amazing committee.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I look for with the guests that we have here, and you guys have already mentioned it, in terms of relationships. Mm-hmm. How early on in your previous careers, or was it the personal growth track that led you to understand how important relationships are to success in any genre?
Yeah, I think that's a recent. I have to confess that at 64, I'm discovering a lot of new things. One, I'm in the most productive years of my life, so that's a good thing for me. The New England Journal has announced that, so that's really cool.
Nice.
But I'm afraid. But one thing I've just realized is this is how my life has led me to. I mean, when I was younger, I saw my career and life developing differently. It started out in starting a business and being generous and a family. But now looking back, I see how every step of the way I've been led into this work here. But I just did that thing where I lost my point of reference. What was your original question?
No worries. That is hilarious. We'll work on the edits. No, we were just discussing like having people.
Relational. Yeah. Okay. So I will confess that I have been a transactional person all my life, quite honestly, wow. As an entrepreneur, and I think in a white space. That's easy to do because relational is not that important
I was just going to say, I hate to interrupt here, but I was just going to say that's a luxury that white entrepreneurs have that Black entrepreneurs do not have historically, exactly. Right? Is to be able to be transactional. I can call Tom to do XYZ. I can call Frank to do XYZ and know that they can do it, get it done. We don't have to move forward. Whereas in our community, we know that somebody can do our marketing, but they have to do it after work, right? Or we know that somebody can do this and they can't do it until next week because, they have to do, 5 or 6 different things. So we have to nurture those relationships. And because we've given a service or a kindness in the past, they'll come back around and do the same thing for us. And so I love that you mentioned that. So yeah. Keith, maybe you can answer that question on the flip side. How important, or when did you realize how important relationships were to success?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because Tom and I had a conversation today about a particular way of engaging a group of Black leaders in terms of, do you just say, hey, I want to come to your meeting, or can I show up at something? And I'm like, that is so, I'm just oriented. I think our world doesn't operate. I mean, especially if it's across the color line,
Sure.
right? I mean, and because I mean, like I say, I haven't been mostly behind the ivory tower, mostly working with collaboratively within divisions of higher education.
Yeah.
It is very much a relationship building space, because you're working with people across enterprises and you're running projects and programs, at least in the roles that I had. And then in Durham, North Carolina, now Tom has lived in Durham for 30 something years. I have a multiple legacy family in Durham, North Carolina.
Okay.
So I got a whole lot of roots and historical realities of what it means to go into certain rooms of Black peers and just know that trust is about that thin.
Yeah.
Even and especially across the color line. So I'm very sensitive to that. And so it's big. And in fact, Tom talked about, as I get older, I even get more concerned about who the gatekeepers are, right?
Yes.
In the community and what level of rapport and respect we have with them. And in fact, those same friends of ours we talked about earlier, were very much deliberate about that. Like, hey, don't just come into our community because you have an ideal solution, or because you have money. We don't care about your money. We care about how you respect us. And you do have to build up a track record that shows that you're just not there for a transaction. You're just not there to say, I got a Black friend, or I'm recruiting a Black person to be on my board.
Right.
All of that sort of, and quite honestly, it happens way too often, and it just gets more sickening as you get older, that the relationships are taken or objectified, as we'd say, and taken for granted around that. So we have some tough, one of the adventures and joys of Tom and I coming to do this work is what happens when we run into those tensions and conflicts,
Yes.
Between us and the people we're working with. And thankfully, because our primary motivation is out of a sense of calling. Like we've experienced levels of privilege in our life.
Yes.
We have trusted relationships in a lot of different spheres. And so we said, well, we will step out and, like you said, put those at risk, right? We're putting ourselves at risk, those relationships at risk. But it's a really high return. It's a really high reward. And we are glad to be doing well overall in the business with our portfolio companies. But yeah, relationships, they got to be central. They got to be taken really seriously.
I've found that all wealth tends to end up in two places, and that's the stock market and real estate, right? Mm-hmm. And so without divulging too much of the secret sauce, my question would be, do you guys have an end game and or idea of how to perpetuate the investments that you've made by getting an exit strategy centered around those two industries? Either one can take that one.
Well, when we start our presentation, we remind everyone that the two primary ways to build wealth are either in your home, real estate, or in your business. And whether any of our companies will have an IPO and end up on the stock market is 1 in 1,000. I mean, sure. It's the unicorns that do that.
Absolutely.
But what we're hoping for is the next level. The companies we invest in are very likely to either be bought out or have an exit of some kind. Maybe the next round will be so big that the the guys coming in want to buy out all the small guys. So that's one of the things that happen. So every company that we look at, one of the conditions or qualifications is what is their exit plan, and that's what every investor, whether it's an angel or VC, looks at when they look at a pitch, is what is your exit. And there's a lot of different ones, but we do hope that there'll be an exit that results in financial reward to the founders.
Right.
And as I understand it, and I've learned about, the flow of, in the end, we want the flow of capital to go back into the community and address the wealth gap.
Kind of that pay it forward mentality, right? Where let's say you end up getting bought out now, maybe you help to invest in the next generation of startups.
Right. And a lot of white investors, when they hear us say that, they say, well, you're just going to make some kid and their kids rich. But we counter that because, in my space, most of the money just is inherited to children.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, that's really the way the money flows. But I've had relationships with African Americans who've died, and I've actually seen how the money flows, and it doesn't just float. It often flows horizontally and even vertically. So like, I am confident that when these founders do well, that money is going to go, horizontally through their siblings and up to cousins and uncles and parents. And, it won't just be concentrated in the founder and their children.
Absolutely. One of the things that I like about this space is I used to have a mentor that told me when the social media boom was happening, he said to me, Chuck, his name's Edwin Haynes, he's out of Houston, Texas. And he said, Chuck, don't get distracted. A lot of this, social media will create a lot of millionaires. It will create some wealth because it collapses time frames, all that good stuff, allows you to build your network. He said, but a lot of the real wealth will still be made offline. And so my question, and maybe Keith, you can take this one, is how does social media come into play for potential partners and or while you guys are looking for investments, right? Do you guys look at the following? Do you guys look at how fast they grow their social media presence? Or are you guys looking at the blood and guts of the business, right? Which is the revenue, the overhead, the supply chain, things like that.
Yeah, because we have a diverse portfolio, it's, we've got examples of how vital that is for different sectors. If consumer products, it's a given. You gotta, your marketing, we value the relationship that I guess I can put it out there. AWS, Amazon has tried to energize and give that resource to our founders, and we're always trying to help them increase or drive their go-to-market strategies and revenue streams and all of that. You're right, has to be a strong play in the social media space. Commercialization, we were just looking up that term. Now, again, with the joy of this work, Tom's been an angel investor longer than me. For me, I've been teaching high school kids about training them on the world of private enterprise and the last couple decades around pitching and sourcing capital. Not so much sourcing capital until we started our fund, but the whole being able to get out in front and communicate your vision well. People have to see you as we talk, the word resilient is that you're adapting to the needs and the challenges of the time and the ways people are, creating wealth. And it is, and we keep saying we're a startup because I mean, part of it is this is our first fund.
Sure.
We haven't had an exit yet, so we probably will keep saying that until then we can't say it anymore when we actually have a sale or transaction. But
Absolutely.
we just revised our website and got more intentional around our LinkedIn presence, being on your podcast now, and on others, to show how serious we are, how committed we are, and also to be in tune with who are the thought leaders out there that are putting quality information out, trying to connect us across the country. Also, I guess I'll put a plug in for Culture Shifting Weekend.
Yeah.
Andrea Hoffman, you familiar with them or with their work? But they've been a great space for us to connect, to build relationships, to see opportunities for investments. It's meant a lot. Tom and I mean, we talked about that early on, coming out of, Tom was involved in the early 90s of helping to create the RTP software capital ecosystem, et cetera. And again, mostly for white founders. And then,
Sure.
We've seen what it means to be a part of a community. We have a syndicate group here that we're a part of. We meet monthly to hear and listen to. I recently joined the Investors of Color Network, great group pulling together folks in our field. So that's a kind of a broad response to your maybe more specific question around the social media space. But, everything is communication nowadays. How well you do it, how often, how consistent people see your voice. And I guess the last thing I'll say with that, as you said, a lot happens offline as well. I don't know. I have to have a physical presence in the community. So we are part of Provident 1898, which is a networking community. Actually, I shouldn't say, it's a co-working community of innovators and creators and entrepreneurs, based off the Black Wall Street legacy, the founding of North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. So yeah, you got to be out there. You have to be communicating well. Social media is a big part of that, but also it's the as we say, boots on the ground, out talking to people, and interacting in the community.
Very strong. Tom, we're going to jump into the rapid fire section of the interview. It's getting close to wrapping up. I'm going to give you a word. You tell me what that word means to you. And then Keith, I'll give you the word after that one, and we'll kind of piggyback off of that one for a couple of words. The first word is, when you say the word resilient, Tom, what does that word mean to you?
I go with the biological definition that it's the ability for an organism to withstand constant environmental challenges. So think anything that can live on a coral reef.
Nice.
I like it. Keith, if I give you the word commitment, what does that mean to you?
Oh man, I kind of link it with passion. It's something you can't really, you find out a person's commitment when it starts to get difficult. And so passion usually can push you through difficult times. Commitment is, it's interesting when you think of the word committed. You're either committed to a facility for healthcare, or you are committed to your marriage. Tom and I have both been married. He probably like 40 years. I'm coming up on 29, 30. And when I think of commitment, I'm like, yeah, that's no small feat if you can hang in there and be in long-term relationship through thick and thin. Yeah.
My father told me commitment. That's funny that you brought marriage into it. My father told me commitment means doing what you said you would do long after the emotion when you said it has worn off.
I heard that one too. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Tom, vision. When you hear that word, what does it mean to you?
Oh man. Okay. You're gonna have to edit it. This is not.
You're good. You're good.
Vision. Well, that's not one of my ones but I think I would go with it's the ability to see. And a lot of times you don't want to see. I mean, in the work that we do, it's just unfortunate that people have such a lack of vision when it comes to the question of race in America. And it's so easy to historically put the dots right next to each other and see that the question of systemic racism in America is a direct result of the disinheritance of financial opportunity every step of the way, from emancipation to voting rights to FHA to GI Bill.
Yeah.
We have the wealth gap because it's not because people didn't qualify to own a house, but because they were explicitly disinherited from the right to do so.
Yeah, redlining. Keith, I'll give you the word trust.
Oh, that's interesting. You bring that word up because that was a very weighted word for Tom and I early on. I tend not to. Trust has to be built up. I think it's about deposits and withdrawals, and it's the lifeblood of anything, right? If you don't have it in a relationship, the relationship's going nowhere.
Yeah.
And so and it's hard to measure at times, and it's easy to lose, right? But it is gold. It's really, if you can trust someone, like you said, with your when your back is turned or when you're not there, there's nothing more pure than to knowing someone actually has your back or is not going to stab you when a situation arises, and it'll be in their immediate best interest. And my goodness, it's like oxygen, man. It's the more and more I think about it, it's oxygen. It's real.
I like that. Last two. Tom, I will give you success. What does that word mean to you?
Well, it's success is to achieve your goals. I do try to set goals that where there is a chance that success is not guaranteed, and sort of live on the edge of trying to do something that just might not happen, and push yourself a little bit.
I like it. I like it. Keith, value.
Yeah, it's another word I need to just writing on, because we talk about what it means to own something, right? So if you have something of value and it's valuable, it can be hard to let go of, to release, and you may value something more than someone else does, or more than the world does, right? I mean, you think about Black life. It's precious to us, and it's valuable.
Right.
And we say, hey, my life matters. I have value and worth, and we don't believe anybody's listening or cares. It's an issue. Yeah. It's an issue. So yeah, value is another one of those precious words. And it can be difficult at times to come to terms with how much you think something is worth and what someone else thinks it's worth. And we talk about market, what the market says it's worth, and right. Do you hold on to it, or do like my home value is, I mean, you can see part of my home here now. We've been
doing good.
Yeah, we're doing all right. But it's like, hey, how does that compare if we were in another part of town,
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So yeah, I like that. Thanks for asking that.
Absolutely. I tell everybody, like, I would love to take my California home, right? Just the value of it, and move somewhere like an Atlanta or North Carolina, and just to see the difference in perception of value, right? Yeah. Because although we're doing well, my wife and I and the kids, we're doing, quote unquote, well, air quotes, because that's relative. I do know that the perceived value would be different and or greater if I was down south, right? You look and you see what $500,000 will buy you in North Carolina, or what it'll buy you in certain parts of Texas, versus what it'll get you in California. And that's how you can sometimes equate value, right? It's what the market will pay versus where you are, what you've done, what you've grown, all that good stuff. Getting close to wrapping up, you gentlemen have both alluded to something that I think we're just starting to hear in-depth conversations at large about, and it's a shame. There's been documentaries, about this subject, but it goes directly to the creation of wealth. And you mentioned redlining a little bit earlier. We talked about redlining a little bit earlier, and the fact that wealth tends to go laterally instead of penetrating down. Is there an opportunity for people to come up with, I might be giving away a business idea. Is there a way for people to come up with a structure for a business where people are doing venture capital for co-ownership of homes, right? So not necessarily investing in the one-off, the single family or whatever, but a business that we literally are going in 20, 30 people at a time and recycling that wealth. So every 5 years, maybe you refi or take the cash out and now you're quote unquote buying back the block. How would that look so that we can recreate wealth both ways, right? So that you guys have venture capital companies that are reinvesting in the community when they have their exit strategy, and now teaching them to buy property and or land on the back end. Is that an option that's out there, or just not necessarily under you guys' purview?
Well, as you mentioned it, there is actually a startup right here in Durham that is doing exactly that for white people who want to their investment vacation homes. So it's a vacation home, 3 or 4 people get together to buy a vacation home, and he's got his whole business plan all worked out like that. And we hope to see any sort of opportunities that create and keep more wealth in the Black community. As we've been known here in North Carolina, I can't really speak, but there are organizations in North Carolina. I have a meeting this Friday with a group that's a Triangle Land Conservancy, and they already have a program. What they do is they buy land and make parks out of it. But what they're also looking at doing is buying land and then selling it at a reduced price to African-American farmers who can build wealth on the land and by what it produces.
Gotcha.
So there's any number. There's a lot of those ideas out there, and a lot like the. But I don't think you need to look at just home ownership. Like right now, we're investing in a company, Freeman Capital. They're here in Charlotte, and what he's doing is selling at a much lower cost what you would have to get, what you'd have to have like a $200K salary to buy from one of these wealth management companies. But on a subscription basis, he's targeting African Americans with incomes of $75,000 to $100,000 with basic financial wealth building skills and a software product that will help them achieve that with regular monthly goals. Nice. And it's really basic financials like getting out of debt, paying off your credit cards, building up your emergency fund. It's nothing. It's not like telling people to go invest in this stock or that stock or become a day trader. It's just, basic financial guidance with the opportunity to talk to a person.
You gentlemen are both of the age group where we start to discuss legacy, and what that means for us, moving forward, whether that's our children or grandchildren, if it applies. What is the goal? What is the why, the legacy for Resilient Ventures?
I'll jump in. So Keith, you can close on this. People ask me if I'm all in on this, and I could give you like 10 reasons why I'm all in. But one of them is that, my daughter married an African-American lawyer, and I have African-American grandkids. So, my legacy is that, my grandkids will be able to talk about what their granddad did for their community.
Nice. Keith, what about yourself?
Yeah. I just have to reckon again with, the tragedies we've experienced in this country in this last several years, with the former person in the White House, the resurgence of this narrative of white supremacy. My children, as I mentioned to you before we started the podcast, my daughter just graduated college.
Yes.
This year. My son's in grad school. She's planning to go into diversity and equity and inclusion, belonging work. Okay. And we still have, my mom was in the same field. She was in equal employment opportunity. She was a director of that, and she spent most of her career trying to make sure that we had opportunity for employment.
Yeah.
We know employment is the starting point, right? We want to be able to own some things.
Yes.
We had the recent issue with once again the disproportionate ownership in Major League Sports. I hope our legacy can be that we see more of us in the venture capital world, making significant income to care for our communities. And it's, as I mentioned too earlier, the book, The Disintegration of Black America, I commend that book. And that was many years ago. We're probably worth rereading again, because it looked at the sectors of Black America, the low income, the poor, which is the, more the masses. And then a few of us who have gotten out and kind of lived, like you say, in air quotes, that space of economic, some level of economic wealth.
Yes.
Where we have a level of security. For example, owning my home, I didn't grow up in, we rented, the fact that I can own my home now. So I want to see more owners. We used the Jackie Robinson analogy when we first pitched our fund. It was like, look, there's a whole league of Negro players.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them were considered, and I just read another biography about him recently, and talking about a number of other players between the names of like Satchel Paige and all these other players.
Absolutely.
That could have, very well all kind of been integrated in more larger numbers. And we're still doing that now in venture and entrepreneurship. And so legacy is that we changed the game to, again, people talk about, you move the needle.
Yeah.
I mean, if we help, a handful of entrepreneurs in the South not leave the South because they feel like they can't raise money here, then that will be a lasting legacy too. And I need to point out, we want to give a shout out to Bill Spruill, one of our friends here in the Carolinas, who recently exited the company for a historic amount of money for a Black founder.
Nice.
And that's legacy. That's exciting for us.
I love it. What's next for Resilient Ventures as we're getting ready to wrap up? What's next for Resilient Ventures? Where are we going to see the surprise that no one saw coming? I know there's some companies that are, you guys are in talks with that you can't divulge right now. I've seen the list, some of the portfolio. What's next?
Yeah.
Well, I hope to see we get more than one exit. We have 5 of our 9 companies are in up rounds, and I just hope that when we go to start raising fund 2, our portfolio sheet will be jumping off the page at them saying like, should have been in us Fund one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. Well, I will say there may be a strategic partnership with getting some of those companies that you work with as guests on this Hawk Vision podcast. I think that just makes sense. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, you have been rocking with the great ones, Thomas Droege, Keith Daniel, and yours truly, Chuck Hawkins, here at the Hawk Vision podcast. We've been talking venture capital, the importance of investing and closing the wealth gap between the races for African Americans, personal growth, and so much more. I hope this interview was informative. Hope we added a smile to your day, but more importantly, we hope that we've helped you shorten the learning curve on your journey to success. Make sure you take a look at the show notes. Buy your boy a coffee. I'm officially out. We cannot have that. Like, share, subscribe across all of your platforms. Send in your messages and guest suggestions. I cannot continue to grow this show without you, my visionaries, and so appreciative that you're giving us some time today. You know how it goes. There's absolutely no miracle that has ever happened without someone doing something. We'll see you either at the top or from the top. The choice is yours. Thomas, Keith, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck, and thanks for your great questions. You've made me really think here today.
Absolutely.